Right, meta-ethics revision for A-level philosophy. This would also be relevant to lots of A-level religious studies content to do with meta-ethics. I'm making this video for my Year 13 philosophy students, class of 2024, because I wasn't able to teach them meta-ethics due to some family circumstances. So I hope this will be useful revision, or maybe vision. Hopefully it's not too much vision and it's mainly revision. I will release this video later on after they've done their exams to make it available to the public. So here we go. What is metaethics? You'll remember that there are 3 levels of ethical discussion in philosophy or in moral philosophy. There are 3 levels of discussion. There's normative ethics, which is your bread and butter standard ethics, sort of the middle layer, which involves asking what actions are right and wrong. So utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and virtue ethics are all normative ethical theories, asking what should be normative, what should be normal, if you like, for how we should act, what actually are the right and wrong actions. Then there's applied ethics, which is taking those theories. You can visualize it as the top layer built on to your ethics house, if you like, and that takes those theories and applies them to everyday situations, or in the case of A-level AQA philosophy, 4 areas you need to know about how the theories apply to. And then meta-ethics you could visualize as the foundational layer of ethics underpinning everything, or looking at that which intellectually speaking underpins everything. What are the foundations of ethics? And what that means specifically for moral philosophy, moral philosophical meta-ethical questions is, what is the meaning of ethical language? So it's no longer just what actions are right and wrong, that's the normative level, but what do the words right and wrong actually mean? What do those words mean? Is there such a thing as an objective, real, factual right and wrong? Or are they just concepts, or even just words that we use that express something that isn't factual? They could just express our emotions about different actions, for example, or they could just be commands, but they have no basis in any, or grounding in any kind of objective truth about reality. Hopefully this is making sense. I'll try and translate myself. So that's meta-ethics. If it's helpful, think in terms of meta, meaning could mean many different things in Greek, but one of the things it can mean as a preposition is beyond. So meta-ethics goes beyond regular ethics or after regular ethics to look at what is at the foundation of ethics. If you go a level deeper, what are these words we use in ethics, like right and wrong and good and bad and so on? What do they actually mean? Do they have any basis in fact or not? Yeah, so there you go. Maybe that doesn't actually help you, but anyway, let's speed up a bit because this is meant to be revision. So you've got 2 bullet points under the initial meta-ethics heading on the AQA A-level philosophy specification for meta-ethics, and here you go. They are, where's laser pointer? They are the origins of moral principles, reason, emotions, attitudes, society, and then a distinction between cognitivism and non-cognitivism. So this first one is quite straightforward. I've never seen an exam question on it yet, but it's basically making the point that our moral principles, like you should be kind to people, you shouldn't punch people in the face, could come from different places. They could come from just reason. They could be things that reason can show us if you think about it using your reason. People like Kant, for example, would say you can work out the moral law using your reason, wouldn't he? They could just come from our emotions and attitudes about different actions in the world, rather than having their source in reason. They could just be the outworkings of different emotions, like it's nice to be kind to people and it feels good when they're kind to you and it's nice to think about it, and also it hurts to be punched, and it's not a nice thing to think about being punched. So that could be where the moral principles come from, those sorts of things. Or we don't like the idea of punching, or society. So they could be societal, sociological constructs that our society has created, maybe so that people will follow certain class rules and know their place and so on. There's overlap here, of course. You could, these aren't mutually exclusive necessarily. They could be the result of emotion, attitudes, and society, for example. Those could blend. But anyway, that's what AQA have picked, those terms. By the way, emotion, attitudes, this would be people like A.J. Ayer, Hume would say that's where our moral principles actually come from. Society, you might say someone like, I don't know, Karl Marx or Emil Durkheim for saying moral principles come from our society. Now, this is the absolutely key one, the second point on this slide. Distinction between cognitivism and non-cognitivism. If you can get this, if you can nail this, and the difference between realism and anti-realism, you've got meta-ethics. You'll be fine for any 5-marker or 3-marker, and probably for a 12-marker, but you need a bit more detail than that. So here you go. Pay close attention if you haven't got this yet, if you haven't got this before from somewhere. Cognitivism and versus non-cognitivism in metaethics, and this comes up again, doesn't it, in Metaphysics of God for religious language, is a linguistic distinction. It's about language. Cognitivists believe that ethical language, such as murder is wrong, classic example, gives you propositions. It is propositional, so it's making factual claims about the world which can be true or false. So short version is cognitivism is the view that ethical language can be true or false, because it's telling you something which could be a fact, could be a legitimate fact. If it's helpful, cognosco in Latin, to know, I know. So for a cognitivist about a particular area of language, they believe that when you are talking about what should we say, the objects of that language refers to, you are actually referring to something. There is something to know there. If you say murder is wrong, wrongness is as a property that something can actually have. So it could be true or false statement, and probably they would think it was true to say that murder is wrong. The language can be true or false. That's cognitivism. Non-cognitivism is just not that. People who are non-cognitivists about ethical language think there is nothing to know, there's nothing to cognize when you use ethical language. It's a kind of linguistic mistake to think that it's giving you fact claims that could be true or false. So if you say murder is wrong, sure, you're using words, maybe they have a kind of meaning, but that meaning isn't to do with whether that statement being possibly true or false. You're not saying something that could possibly be true or false. I know this is difficult. That's the best way I can explain it in a short revision video, but basically it's a language distinction about whether the language can be true or false or not. That's the simplest way to remember it and understand it, I think. So for cognitivists, one more time, ethical language can be true or false. For non-cognitivists, it can't even be true or false. It's not giving you those kind of fact claims in the same way that if you said it's sunny outside, for example, that could be true or false. It's not on the same. People might think it's trying to do that for a non-cognitivist. Other people might think that, but they're wrong for not according to non-cognitivism. The language doesn't work on that way, and it's a category mistake to think that it even could be true or false. Okay, so language distinction. But then you've got this distinction between realism and anti-realism, and again, this applies equally well to Metaphysics of God, but we're in the wonderful world of morality here. So realism, anti-realism is more straightforward, it's easier. So get cognitivism, non-cognitivism first, that's the trickier one. And then this should hopefully be a bit more straightforward. Moral realism, you remember, is the view that there are objective, and let's use some synonyms, there are objective, true, real, that's an easy synonym, moral facts out there which are mind independent. Here you go, there are mind independent moral properties or facts. Properties, features of the world, facets of things. So that's a bit too similar to facts. So this is the belief that there is an objective morality which is true. It's not just something independent of our minds. Real, it's real. So true, objective, real, realist. All those words you can associate with one another. And so often, well, apologies, all moral realist theories are going to be cognitivist, because if they are realist, they hold that there are mind independent moral facts which are true. It is a true, real, objective fact that murder is wrong. There's your example. That's something a moral realist could say. So if there can be true facts, that means they think the language can be true or false in the first place. So realists are going to be cognitivists. So here's the two forms of realism you need to know about for AQA philosophy, and they appear on A-level RS courses as well. Naturalism and non-naturalism. So both cognitivists, moral language can be true or false, and so there is correct, true moral language out there that refers to the true moral facts. What's the difference between naturalism and non-naturalism then? I think of it in terms of it's to do with how you find out. It's to do with the status of the moral facts, but it's also to do with how you find out what they are. So for naturalism, what that means is that these moral properties or facts about the world, like murder is wrong, are always associated closely with things or properties of the world that you can observe. That's where the natural bit comes from. It's not like you can go and find them with a magnifying glass out in a field. Well, I suppose in a sense you could, but that's not. It's not so much that it is that they're part of nature, but it's the fact that they can be observed naturalistically, which means it's called naturalism. So your classic example is utilitarianism. Okay, the example should hopefully make it clearer. So for utilitarianism, which is just naturalistic in metaethical terms, what's the good? What is moral goodness? It's what makes us happy or produces pleasure. So pleasure / happiness is the good, and that is something you can observe in the sense that you can feel it for yourself. Oh, this feels good. This makes me feel happy. This feels pleasurable. So this is a morally good experience, something that should be maximized. And also you can observe it in the sense of you can see people experiencing happiness. You can ask them, how are you feeling? I'm feeling happy. So you've made an observation of something there that's part of nature. So goodness and badness are natural properties of the world. To work out what they are, you and find them, you observe in the world phenomena which are associated with them. So in the case of utilitarianism, goodness. And you can tell me what it is for virtue ethics as well. What's the good for Aristotle? Well, it's eudaimonia. So it's experiencing a state of flourishing and exhibiting the virtues. And again, that is something you can observe and see in the world, according to Aristotle. So trying to find out what is good, well, look for where there are people flourishing that show the virtues. That's showing you what's good. So for Aristotle, it's a true, real fact, it's a cognitivist realist, that flourishing and developing the virtues is morally good. So you can work out where moral goodness is happening and what the morally good actions are through observation of the world. It's always going to be connected to observable phenomena, observable empirical phenomena. I know this is tricky, but that's my best explanation in a short revision video. The textbook will help you. Don't just rely on philosophyalevel.com because it's not enough detail. Even that stuff will admit that it's revision. If you're not clear on this, you need to dive back into your own class notes. You need to dive back into the textbook. I'm not saying read the whole textbook again. I know I'm getting preachy here, but I'm not saying read the whole textbook again. But if you want a good grade, where there are gaps, where you're not sure, go back into that textbook text and then use the revision guides and so on to help you understand it. Just the revision guides by themselves, in my experience, are not going to get you the grade if you're trying to patch those holes. So what's non-naturalism? Well, it's very similar. So cognitivist, moral language can be true or false. Realist, there are true moral facts. The difference is one way of understanding it at least, is how you find out what those moral facts are. Because Moore, our famous non-naturalist, criticized naturalism, saying, well, if you say that the moral good is, for example, pleasure, happiness, like utilitarianism says, well, how do you know that it's pleasure, happiness? You can always say, but is it really such and such? It's still an open question. This is a very crude summary of his open question argument. It's always an open question if you say the good is blank. Someone can legitimately, rationally, philosophically speaking, say, well, is it really that? Because that conclusion is still up for grabs. it hasn't been shown. He's saying it's just a utilitarian assertion that that's what the good is, on my understanding, on my reading. So where does he go from that? Well, he doesn't say that there therefore is no good, but he says that actually there is still moral goodness that's objective, but the point about it is that it isn't defined in terms of natural properties, it's just in a category of its own. So in other words, it's defined in terms of non-natural properties, hence non-naturalism. Let me try and explain that another way, because I know this is hard. More's famous example is the color yellow, okay? And he says, what does he say? He says, take yellow. You could break down yellow into the wavelength of light that is associated with yellow and is found in conjunction with yellow. If you're looking at yellow light in a physics lab and so on, you can find its wavelength, but that is still not yellowness itself. To know what yellow is, yellowness, and you could link this to metaphysics of mind stuff, the only way to know that is to see and experience yellow for yourself. So the experience of seeing something yellow is not the same as the wavelength of light yellow. That wavelength idea is reducing yellowness down to something which may be linked to it, but is not it itself. What's the point of the yellow analogy? Well, the analogy here is reducing down moral goodness to something else, which may often be found in conjunction with it, like pleasure and happiness. Yeah, doing good actions, More's a consequentialist, will often lead to pleasure and happiness. But to say that the pleasure and happiness is moral goodness itself is a mistake for More. In fact, he calls that the naturalistic fallacy, when you attempt to define something indefinable in terms of something else that you can observe. Reduce it down. So the wavelength is not the same as yellow. The pleasure and happiness is not the same as moral goodness. Moral goodness itself is in a category of its own. It's sui generis, and so it's in a category of its own. It can't be reduced down and explained or understood in terms of something else. I know this is difficult. That's the best I've got for you today in a short revision video on this particular day that I'm recording. I might make a longer metaethics video because people are always desperate for metaethics stuff that tries to explain it again in even more detail. But sorry, class of 2024, this is the best I can do for you now. More issues with moral realism. Let's keep going. Let's try and make this under half an hour if we can. More issues. Hume's fork and A.J. Ayer's verification principle. You know that those are basically the same thing because Ayer was extremely influenced by Hume. This is an empiricist style way of approaching knowledge and meaning, which would say that basically meaningful language comes down to two possible categories. Meaningful language is either A, logical tautology, so necessary truths, you might say analytic truths, a priori truths, that's option one, or option two, it's empirically verifiable. You might say synthetic, well, there's problems there, of course. You might say a posteriori. This is one of the places you can trace this distinction back to. So things that you can observe and check in the world. That's category two. Confusingly, Hume's language, for those remember, are category one, relations of ideas, and category two, matters of fact, which I know confuses lots of students, but those unfortunately just are his original language. A.J. Ayer's language is either A, logical necessity, one, logical necessity, or two, things which at least in principle are empirically verifiable. And if something is not one of those, then it's not meaningful, it's not a candidate for genuine knowledge. So you can use this to criticize moral realism, which says there are moral facts. Hume and Ayer would say, well, these so-called moral facts, like murder is wrong, they're not just logically the case. They're not logical tautologies, necessary truths of reason, because plenty of people disagree with them, they claim, and we can deny them without contradiction and so on. So don't fall into that category. And also, we can't go out and check them. They would disagree with naturalism and Mill and so on, that you can check them by observing the world naturalistically. Show me these moral facts. Go and find them out in the field and bring them to me and show them to me. Well, you can't. So actually, this language is well, meaningless in the way that it's trying to be meaningful. At least it might mean something else, like it might be an expression of your emotions about certain actions, but it is not possibly true or false. It's a way of, and it's not referring to any, at least, yeah, if we're just sticking to anti-realism right now, it's not referring to any true fact, certainly. So just do away with it. Maybe commit it to the flames, Hume would say. But that's that criticism in a nutshell. Then, hang on, about to cough. Oh, excuse me. Then you've got Hume's argument that moral judgments are not beliefs, since beliefs alone could not motivate us. So this is within Hume's thought world again. Another thing Hume would say, and he has lots to say about realism, doesn't he, is that a belief about the world can never actually motivate you to do anything, because beliefs just tell you, well, in his language, cold, either relations of ideas or cold matters of fact. These are all related, these Hume criticisms. And knowing just logical truths like 1 + 1 = 2, or knowing that, oh yeah, it's sunny outside today, that's not going to make you do anything. However, moral language is to do, or moral judgments are to do with compelling us, motivating us to do things. Like, I feel motivated not to murder right now. But because for Hume, beliefs never lead to this kind of motivation. What leads to this kind of motivation? Emotions. This tells him that moral judgments cannot be mere beliefs. Because again, in Hume's world, in Hume's thought world, in Hume's understanding, mere beliefs do not motivate us. It's our emotions, it's our passions, which reason is a slave to, that actually motivate us to do anything. So therefore, moral judgments must be to do with emotion and can't be beliefs. Oh, excuse me. Then you've got Hume's is-ought gap. Remember, that's the idea from Hume again, that it's an invalid logical leap to go from an is statement to an ought statement. Or if you want the stricter, more precise version, it's an invalid logical leap to move from a descriptive statement about the whole, how the world is, to an evaluative conclusion about how the world should be. Let me give you an example. He might say to the utilitarians, just because it is the case that something feels pleasurable or causes happiness, doesn't mean that you should bring about as much happiness as possible. That might be something nice that you like the idea of, but there's no logical reason why you ought to bring about more happiness just because it is the case that you like it, or just because it is the case that something makes you feel happy. So he's saying that you can't jump from just observing how the world is to these supposedly factual, objective claims about how the world should be, because those can always be disagreed with, and there's no logical reason that actually that the world should be any way at all. That's a big Humean idea. You can't prove with logic, with any kind of reasoning about relation of ideas or matters of fact, that the world ought to be any way at all. That people should behave. We'd like people to behave in certain ways, great, and not behave in other ways, but there's no logical reason why they have to, is Hume's argument. Show me the reasoning, show me the proof, show me the evidence, the observation, these facts are out there and that we must obey them. No, you can't get it. So there's a gap between is statements and ought statements. That's is-ought gap. And then you've got Mackey making some more arguments along similar lines, famously in Ethics, Inventing Right and Wrong. Argument from relativity. Don't worry, it's not Einstein. And queerness. Don't worry, that's nothing to do with LGBTQIA stuff. The argument from relativity. Well, people have different moral beliefs in different societies and cultures and tribes and people groups and so on all around the world. These so-called moral facts seem to be very relative. Depends who you're asking about whether murder is wrong, or whether cannibalism is wrong, or whether it's right or wrong to, well, here's a controversial one for you, to practice an LGBTQIA lifestyle. That the different people around the world will hold different beliefs and values about those things. This suggests, says Mackey, the simplest explanation for this is that there are no objective values, because otherwise people would agree on them more, wouldn't they? That's a much more likely explanation than the idea that some people are simply wrong and have misintuited or misworked out what the moral values are. Well, that reminds me, very briefly, I forgot to say something about more up here. We should mention that non-naturalism is also called intuitionism, because the way you do work out what the good is, the indefinable good in a category of its own for more, is to intuit it. We just, according to non-naturalists, have a special faculty, you can call it intuition, moral intuition, what have you, which means that to work out what the good is, we just have to see it. Like, you just have to see yellow to know what it is. You just have to see and perceive what the good is. It's or maybe a better analogy in this sense is maths. Just like you can see in your mind that 1 + 1 = 2. If you use your powers of moral intuition, you can just intuit that it's wrong to murder people, and that's a fact, according to Moore. So Mackey would completely argue back and say, well, why do people intuit these so-called moral facts completely differently then? Why the disagreement? So there must actually be no objective moral facts to intuit out there. And then argument from queerness is almost a bit of a reductio, but he's saying if there were such things as moral facts, these would be really queer, old-fashioned word for strange, weird, odd things. How so? Well, they would be, let's go first with metaphysically or ontologically weird, because they wouldn't be like any other kind of facts. Say the fact that water boils at 100 degrees C, that is something you can test in the world, you can observe it, but again we keep coming back to this point for the critics of realism. How can you test murder is wrong? How can you observe that as a fact? It would be a very odd thing. It wouldn't be like any other things that we call a fact, so they would be strange. And similarly, they are epistemologically, they would be epistemologically queer, because certainly in the case of Moore, we would be finding out with them what they are using some very strange sense or power of perception, which is completely unlike all our other senses and faculties. So Mackey's just saying, to talk about it being a fact of the world that murder is wrong, for example, that you can work out just by thinking about it or just by observing bits of the world and then magically getting this conclusion, is a very weird, strange idea. There were no other facts like this about how things should be, and there were no other facts that we can work out in this way. So this seems to be a very weird, strange invention that actually, if you analyze it philosophically in the proper way, it turns out to be just that, an invention. So there you go. That's the whistle-stop tour of moral realism. That means I have to do anti-realism in 2 minutes to be under half an hour, so this won't be half an hour. Let's keep going. All right, and now moral anti-realism then. My voice has gone a bit quieter because I've gotten up early to finish recording this while my kids are still asleep, so hopefully you can still hear me, but that's why my voice has gone a bit quieter. Moral anti-realism then should be possible to work out what it is. So it's not realism, the view that there are, here you go, where's my pointer? Written here, there are no mind-independent moral properties or facts. So in other words, there are no objective, true, real moral facts out there, outside of our minds, part of the world, to be discovered. So when we say something like murder is wrong, it is not a real, true fact of the world. It's a kind of mistake to think of that as a true fact. That's not something that can be true in the way that it can be true that water boils at 100 degrees C, or triangles have 3 sides, or it's sunny today. Anything like that. It's not possible for the language. Well, hang on. The language is never true like that. This is the one that often will catch us out, that often catches us out. The most difficult one, error theory. You'd think that all anti-realist, so no real, true moral facts, views were non-cognitivist. That would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it? But the trickiest theory to get your head around, so worth spending most time on, is error theory from Mr. Mackey himself, Dr. or Professor Mackey, I suppose. And this view is cognitivist anti-realist. So if you run that all through again, you'll remember that means cognitivist means error theory. Mackey's error theory holds that ethical language can be true or false. It does express propositions which can be true or false. So it makes sense as a fact in terms of factual claims. It is trying to make a valid factual claim about the world, but it's cognitivist anti-realist, this theory. So even though he thinks the language does give you true or false sentences, it just so happens that they are always false because there are no moral facts. So for error theory to say murder is wrong is a sentence that could be true or false. It could be true that murder is wrong in the linguistic sense, in the sense that the language is making an attempt to talk about a fact. It's not that sentence just couldn't even be true or false. In the linguistic sense, the grammar works properly. It could be true or false, but it's always false because there are no moral facts, as we say. So it's not true that murder is wrong because there are no objective moral facts. As Mackey starts his book with that sentence, there are no objective moral facts. So ethical language, even though it technically does give you sentences which could be true or false, there are no objective moral facts, at the risk of repeating myself, so it is always false. This is why it's called error theory. It makes a kind of error. Ethical language makes errors in trying to give you moral facts that don't exist, even though the language looks like it could be giving you true facts. Hopefully that makes sense of error theory. Again, broken record. If you're still not sure, go back into the textbook, go back into the open edition moral philosophy textbook, ethics for A-level, textbook. Go back into Lacewing. Don't just rely on philosophyalevel.com or what have you, because I've given you basically as good a revision summary with my mouth as that will give you in words. Next two are much easier, I hope, to get your head around, because they're non-cognitivist. So you'll remember that means next two theories that come under anti-realism say, careful about saying that theories believe things, by the way. I don't think theories believe things technically. Theories would hold things, or this is the view that, so being non-cognitivist, ethical language cannot be true or false. Does not express prepositions which can be true or false. It's a mistake to think it could be true or false in this case. So they're expressions of something else. It's like going, ouch. If you say ouch, if you stub your toe or whatever, that utterance, that piece of language cannot be true or false, but it still expresses something. Ayer and Hare, among others, say this is what ethical language is like. So in the case of Ayer, it's an emotivist view which developed out of Hume. You've got the seeds of emotivism in Hume. And this is the view that ethical language cannot be true or false, but just expresses different emotions about different actions, approval or disapproval. So for an emotivist, murder is wrong means I feel badly about murder, or people feel badly about murder, or just murder bad murder, or murder written in bold with a double exclamation mark, if you will. Just emotional responses to different actions. There's no objective mind-independent fact here. It's all mind-dependent and subjective. Be careful of those words objective, subjective, though, because they can mean so many different things. Here they mean, is there a grounding in a reality beyond human minds or not? An object beyond the human mind, beyond the human mind, or is it just contained to the subjective experience of human minds? Just only, is it? Because you can apprehend objective reality subjectively. So just be careful of that. Better to use words like mind-independent or mind-dependent, like the exam board does. Then prescriptivism, non-cognitivist, anti-realist, like emotivism, all it's doing is just saying what that the moral language expresses fundamentally something different, that is not fundamentally expressing emotions for Hare and prescriptivism. It's fundamentally expressing commands about the world or about certain actions. So murder is wrong cannot be true or false. That sentence is a mistake to think that that sentence could be true or even false, non-cognitivist and anti-realist. So it couldn't be true or false and therefore can't be an objective fact. What is it then? It's just an articulation and expression of someone saying, don't murder. Maybe because they feel badly about it as well, but more fundamentally in linguistic terms, this is all about analysis of language. It's simply do not murder turned into a statement that looks as if it could be true or false but isn't. It's the articulation of a command or a prescription is another meaning of the word. Prescription is a command. Hopefully that makes sense. And then there are issues with all those with these theories as well, aren't there? Because if a person is anti-realist, first of all, if there are no objective moral facts, why do we have moral debates? Why do we reason with each other, persuade each other, disagree? Why are there discussions in the Houses of Parliament about what laws is right and wrong to make? Why can you reprimand a teenager for doing something naughty and say, look, you shouldn't have done that because da 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 da. Actually, you can't. Well, you could do that with varying degrees of success. But yeah, the first point on the specification against these theories is, if there are no moral facts, why do these moral discussions happen? Can you give a proper account for the way we use moral language and debate about rightness and wrongness if there is no objective standard which people are trying to reason and persuade and disagree and argue their way towards agreeing on? Okay, would it really be possible to have these moral discussions and conversations, which we all do, you could argue, if there was no objective truth to about morality that we were trying to find our way towards? Another one, then you've got the problem of accounting for moral progress. In other words, if you view morality as advancing over time, let's say if you think, here's one which might shock you into reconsider anti-realism. If you think that it's better now in our society and certain pockets of Western society that we are less racist, hopefully, in certain pockets, less sexist, that the Me Too movement has meant that women are mistreated and exploited less in certain spheres. If you think it's better now in our society that there are more LGBT rights acknowledged, and in our laws LGBT people have more freedoms, well, anti-realism says that there is no objective betterness about that. That's just one set of purely subjective values triumphing and winning over another set. Nothing has actually improved there in any objective, real, true terms. All it is different opinions, mind-dependent opinions, holding sway over others. Can you really say that there's no moral progress, anti-realists? Isn't it better that the world's in certain places improving and living standards are improving? Isn't that just objectively good? Well, no, according to anti-realists, because there is no objective good. Can you really stomach that? And then perhaps the major one, although it's maybe expressed a little bit oddly, or particularly on the specification, whether anti-realism becomes moral nihilism. So as you know, nihilism, belief in nothing, nihil, Latin, nothing. Moral nihilism, nothing is true, nothing is good, nothing is right. So doesn't this mean you can just do whatever you want? And isn't that also counterintuitive and repugnant as a conclusion? Because, for example, if moral nihilism is true, there are no objective, true moral values. Well, doesn't that mean that technically people, in a metaethical sense, and I suppose in a normative sense as well, can just do whatever they want? So let's go for the big examples. Let's go for, some people say not to use them in arguments because they're too extreme, but if it's going to apply anywhere in philosophy, it's going to apply here. Hitler and the genocide of the Jewish people in the first half of the 20th century, the Holocaust. For anti-realists, there is nothing objectively wrong about this. There was nothing objectively wrong about this. Can we really stomach that? Can we really go along with that conclusion? Isn't that just too counterintuitive? Any other horrible thing you can think of on a small or big level, it's just subjective emotion or subjective prescription or a mistake to say that these things are truly wrong. There is no true real fact about these things being wrong. Can we really say that? Are you really prepared to bite the bullet, as it were, anti-realists, and say that these things weren't wrong in any objective sense? It's just emotions, or just maybe some evolved set of mind-dependent attitudes. This is difficult for many to stomach. You could say that's going to be the major objection in my book to moral anti-realism. Although I actually would be an anti-realist if I wasn't also a theist, because I think you need God to ground morality. Without God, everything is permissible, as Dostoevsky wrote, and I think Nietzsche says the same thing. Anyway, that's going into that's extracurricular. Come to Philosophy Club if you want to talk about that sort of thing, because that's not technical. I suppose you could bring that in if you get an essay on that. Speaking of which, essays. So, class of 2024, you're quite unlikely to get a metaethics essay, because there was one fairly recently, I think a couple of years ago, on the philosophy paper. But it's not impossible. You could get a metaethics essay. It's been phrased in terms of anti-realism before, I think, but they could phrase it in terms of realism and what have you. So unlikely, but still possible, worth being prepared. Here are some things to say about how you might do a Are There Moral Facts essay, also valuable, I hope, for people in future years. Worth thinking about what you'd think first before listening to these brief tips. You could pause this video and think about that now. Are there moral facts or not? Are you a moral cognitivist, a metaethical cognitivist or non-cognitivist, realist or anti-realist? You've heard a few different arguments on each side briefly about those. Most philosophers are moral realists. As I've said in a video, for reasons which I've also just outlined, I find this very puzzling, because I'm not sure how you can be, because of my own reading of the arguments, how you can be a realist without also being a theist, because I think these properties would be very strange in multiple ways if there wasn't a God to guarantee them. But that's just my view. You don't have to agree with me. This is philosophy, isn't it? So you can agree or disagree as long as you're doing it intelligently and with cogent reasons which you express in a coherent argument. Here's my cynical suggestion if you're trying to blag this, if you're just not sure, even after 2 years of studying this with your philosophy teacher. So if you're being cynical, that would mean why not go for realism? But here you go. I've tried to signpost this in what's said earlier. If you're going to go for realism and argue there are moral facts, you need I think the biggest thing you need to deal with is the relativity problem. Why doesn't everyone agree on them? So you could argue that most people do agree on the basics, on a core of morality, and it's only psychopaths or fringe groups that don't agree, or that, there's disagreement around the edges, but there's this basic core of agreement. There are ways of arguing back with that. The textbook's quite good on this. It's got a bit of an extended discussion about this, but that's the biggest issue I think you're going to need to discuss. There are others to discuss too, but make sure you've got a clear view and arguments and counter arguments about that. If you're going the other way, and of course you could include both of these in the opposite essay as issues to discuss as well, because of problems with the other side. But if you're arguing for anti-realism, there are no moral facts, then I think the biggest issue you're going to have to deal with is what we were just talking about, whether you can bite the bullet and say that evil acts are not technically wrong in any objective sense, that can be true. And any objective sense that could be true in the sense of, in the case of non-cognitivist theories like emotivism and prescriptivism, or or that are true in the sense of error theory. And you could you could argue something like, well, it might not be comfortable to say that there is no objective morality, and it might look offensive, but actually, if you think about it carefully, even though it's an uncomfortable conclusion, that is not a reason not to hold this position. So just because it's uncomfortable and counterintuitive, that doesn't mean that it's not true in this case, that there are no true moral or objective facts. Sorry, I expressed that clumsily, but you know what I'm trying to say. The distinction between something being a nice and appealing view to hold, a comfortable or convenient view to hold, and it actually being the case. So you could say that anti-realists have more integrity because they're prepared to go along with uncomfortable conclusions, which nonetheless their reason convinces them are true. And of course, Mackey will mount a big case that you can still work with moral values and have a moral value system, even if you don't claim they have any objective grounding in any sort of higher reality. You could go down that road if you want. Right, this video is plenty long. We're at almost 46 minutes now, so good luck out there. Hope this has been helpful. Class, email me, get in touch, come and see me, come and ask me questions if you have any more meta-ethics questions or problems and this video hasn't helped enough. And yeah, all the very best for the future. Take care.